Resourceful Designer, episode 107. It's all about the follow-up.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer Podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He likes just about anything banana flavored. Mark Dickow.
Well, thank you for joining me this week. I do appreciate you tuning in. Now, it's been a slow week for me. I haven't got very many emails or phone calls for new clients, but that's good because I've had a lot of stuff to work on. I've also working on a little bit of personal things just for myself, so it was kind of nice to have a little bit of extra time for that. But that's the way it goes when you're running your own business. Sometimes the phone rings, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes those emails come in, sometimes they don't. It's all par for the course, and it all evens out over time. So I'm taking advantage of this slow time to get some personal stuff done before the next wave of work comes in. Now, it's been a long time since I've mentioned my social media channels, just in case you want to follow me on any of these platforms. So I'll go over them real quick here. If you're on Twitter, you can follow me at ResourcefulD. The Facebook page is facebook.com/resourcefuldesigner. And of course, if you want to join the Facebook group, which I really suggest you do, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/group, and that'll redirect you to where you can join, answer my 3 questions, and I'll let you in. And I'm also on Instagram at resourcefuldesigner. So if you use any of those platforms, check me out. And now this week's, it's not a tip. It's not a resource. It's not a tip. It's more of a clarification, I guess. So this week's clarification of the week. One of my most popular episodes of Resourceful Designer is episode 11, Pricing Strategies for Your Graphic Design Business. And if you haven't listened to that one, you can do so at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 11. Well, in that episode, I share 5 strategies for pricing or 5 pricing methods that you can use for your business. Whether you're new, whether you're up and running, going well, or you're a veteran. There's different stages of your career where you may want to change prices or pricing strategies. Now, since that episode went out, I've received lots of emails and lots of social media contacts with people asking questions about it or just telling me their way of pricing. And lately, I've noticed quite a few people are getting a little bit confused between project-based pricing and what they're calling fixed or flat rate pricing. I've heard it both ways from different people. And I just want to clarify something here. Project-based pricing is not the same for every project. Whenever I say project-based pricing, that means that you look at a project. When a client pitches you an idea for a job, you look at the project, you figure out how much that project is going to cost, and then you give the client the quote for that job. And that's the price the client will pay for that project. I mean, other strategies like hourly based pricing, you can't give a client a quote up front because it's based on how much time you actually spend on the job. So you spend so many hours on the job, you multiply it by your hourly rate, and that's the price the client pays. But with project based pricing, you kind of do the same thing. You guess how much time you're going to spend on the job, and you give them a price based on that, and you hope that you are right. If it takes you less time, you make more money on it. If it takes you more time than you thought, you make less money on it. But project-based pricing is the most popular form of pricing when it comes to design services. Now, there's the holy grail value-based pricing, which is similar to project-based pricing, but much higher prices based on the perceived value of the design for the company, as opposed to just time that it'll take you to create it. But a lot of people have been writing me about fixed pricing or flat rate pricing. And that's something completely different. In those cases, like what they are saying is they charge a certain fee for a certain service. So you want a logo? I'll design a logo for $250. It doesn't matter what the logo is. That's fixed pricing or flat pricing. You want a website? I'll design a website for $500. Fixed or flat pricing. It's the same thing. Now, I did not talk in episode 11 about fixed or flat pricing because personally, I don't see it as a viable pricing method for design businesses. And yet I do see it, not so much these days, but I remember before, several years ago, looking at designer websites, and a lot of them would have a price list on their website with fixed or flat pricing. A certain amount to create a logo, a certain amount to design a website, a certain amount to design a flyer. And as I said, I don't find these methods viable because you have no idea going in how much work is involved in something. Could you imagine if somebody comes to you, you have a flat rate of $500 for a website, and they come in and they tell you what they want for a website, and it's huge? You can't do well, you can, but you're not going to make a lot of money if you design a 100-page website for $500. So I just wanted to clarify that when somebody says that, yeah, I charge $250 for logos, they are not doing project-based pricing. They're doing fixed pricing. And as I stated earlier, it's not a viable pricing method for a design business. Yes, you can use it, but it's not sustainable. Unless you're doing really basic and not very intuitive designs say, let's use logos, for example. If you're not doing very intuitive logos, maybe they are worth $250, in which case, more power to you. But chances are you're doing a lot of work, a lot of research, or at least I hope you're doing a lot of work and a lot of research and a lot of thinking and a lot of creativity going into the logos you're designing. And if that's the case, then every logo you design should have a different price depending on who it's for and how much work will go into it. So I just wanted to clarify that because, as I said, I've been getting a lot of emails lately about this one episode. People are going back listening to this episode, or people who have just discovered the podcast for the first time and are going through the episodes. And it just seems, I've heard it from time to time, but just recently, I've been getting a lot of people that are talking about fixed or flat rate pricing and telling me that they are doing project-based when in fact it's not project-based what they're doing. So I just wanted to clarify that this week. And now it's all about the follow-up. If you want to run a design business, you have to wear many hats, many more hats than just being a designer. Now, I'm not going to go into all the different things you need to be in order to run a successful design business, but if you're curious, I did cover this back in episode 38, which was titled The Many Hats of a Home-Based Graphic Designer. And you can get that episode by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 38. I do, however, want to talk about one of those hats, and that's the hat of a salesperson. In order to have a successful design business, you have to be a competent salesperson. You don't have to be great. You don't even have to be good. You just have to be competent at sales if you want to get by. But you do have to do sales. Now, I know as soon as I say salesperson, it comes with a certain stigma. Maybe you think of the door-to-door people that come knocking and trying to sell you something, or the typical movie or TV show used car salesman. But sales is not a dirty thing. It's not a dirty profession. Everybody does it. Every business does it. And if you're running a design business, you have to do sales as well. Now, one of the things that all salespeople have in common, or the good ones, is that they are persistent. They know that sales usually don't happen right off the bat. If they want to make a sale, they have to be persistent. Without it, they would never make sales. They wouldn't be able to make a living. And as a salesperson for your design business, you have to be persistent as well, especially when you're searching for new design clients. Now, there's a lot of different strategies that goes into selling, but I'm not going to get into that today. The one thing I want to talk about is the follow-up. Now, all salespeople, whether you sell cars, whether you sell perfume at the mall, whether you sell lawn care service, whatever, all salespeople know that the majority of their sales happens during the follow-up. And this applies to you when you're pitching to new clients. You need to follow up with a client or a potential client anytime you do any cold calls, anytime you do a client presentation, anytime you pitch anything to a new client, anytime you fill out a request for proposal, anytime you make contact with a new potential client for the first time, you should be following up afterwards. Because if you don't follow up, you may be leaving things open for someone else, another designer, to potentially sweep in and use the initial effort that you put into your first meeting. They could come in and use the traction that you built to win over your potential client. Especially if you're making pitches or requests for proposals, it's definitely something to watch out for. So how do you follow up? Well, it depends on how the initial meeting went. Let's say you drop in at a place doing a cold call, or you call somebody up on the phone. Well, then the follow-up, which should be done shortly after, maybe the same day or the next day or within 2 days at the most. You follow up with that person, thanking them for taking the time to talk to you, whether it was 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever. You should follow up and just thank them. And that's all that follow-up is you just thank them. And if there was anything in the works, if there was a potential, like maybe the person was saying, well, maybe they need something, but they're not quite sure, don't talk to them too much about it during the initial follow-up. What you should be doing is just thanking them for taking the time. It just gives them a little peace of mind and a little bit of insight into what type of person you are. You took the time to follow up with them. And then what you do is maybe after a week or 2 at the max, maybe, you send them another follow-up and ask them if they've had a chance to think over whatever it was you talked about. If you were talking to them about possibly designing a new website because you saw theirs and it wasn't that great or it was outdated, send them an email or call them up a couple of weeks later and just say, like, I was just wondering if you've had a chance to think over it. Now, if you're just sending an email, maybe they won't get back to you. Maybe they won't reply. Maybe they will. Hopefully they will. But if they don't, then wait a little bit longer and then send them another follow-up. Just saying, you hope that they took into consideration some of the stuff you talked about, but you understand that maybe they're not ready right now to follow through. So you've made yourself a note to get back to them maybe in a few months, maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now. Tell them that you will follow up. And you know what? This sort of thing, it's not being slimy. It's not being underhanded. It's actually really good because by you doing this, whenever the time comes and they might need your services, they will immediately think of, oh, that designer, they were really polite. They followed up. They weren't over pushy, because you don't want to be pushy in your follow-ups. And if they don't have somebody, a go-to designer already, your foot is already halfway in the door because you've made a connection to them. You don't have a relationship built yet. And if you've listened to this podcast before, you know how much I'm into client relationships. You're not there yet, but you do have a foot in the door. So thank them for the time that they spent with you. Follow up again, asking them if they've had a chance to think over what you talked about. And if they don't look like they're ready to move forward, then tell them that you'll give them more time and that maybe you'll reach out again in 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now. Now, if you did a cold call or something where you didn't get a chance to talk to them, maybe you just sent an email. That's your initial contact. You sent an email to a company, which is a great way. If you know a company that might need something, send them an email. Or maybe you called them up and they weren't there, so you left them a voice message just telling them who you were and what services you were offering. Now, if they don't get back to you after that initial contact, you can follow up a little bit later, just asking them, hi, did you get my first message? Or did you get my email? Or if you stopped in and maybe you left a portfolio sample or something, you can ask them, did you get my package? Many people might ignore the first message. I know I often do. When somebody will ask me something, I'll often ignore, especially if I have no idea who this person is. I'll just delete the email or whatever. But if they send a second email a little bit later asking me if I got that first email, I will remember and I'll go, oh, okay, this person wasn't just spamming me. They're actually interested and are curious and want a response. So often I will reply to the second email. Now, if the person still doesn't reply to that first follow-up after your first message, it's okay to send them another follow-up and just say, I haven't heard back from you. I've sent you a couple of messages. I just want to make sure that my messages are getting through. And that's it. Just leave the message at that. Don't ask them anything. Don't ask them if they need business and all that. Just say that you're concerned that your messages are not getting through. And at that point, they will either hopefully respond and say, yeah, we don't need your services, or yeah, I did. I just been too busy and I haven't had the chance. But again, just being persistent, like I said earlier, all good salespeople know that persistence pays off. By being persistent, it will show them that you are somebody that might be worth dealing with. Because if you're persistent in your follow-ups, then you must be pretty good at following through with whatever job or project that you work on. Now, if after that you still don't hear from them, then what I suggest is send them one final message that just says something to the effect of, I understand you're busy. Maybe you're not ready to discuss this stuff right now. I'll reach out to you again in a few months. And then mark it down on your calendar to follow up with them. Remember, one of the things about salespeople is until they hear no, there's no reason to stop following up. Now, if at one of these points the client gets back to you and says, no, thank you, we don't need your services, then of course, then you stop. But until you hear them say no, there is no harm in keep trying. Because if you're not following up, you're missing a lot of opportunities to gain new clients and new work. I said it earlier, a lot of people will not respond on the initial email or voicemail. Or if you walk in person, they might not reach out afterwards. And that's why the follow-up is so important. You will get a greater number of people responding after your second contact request than the first. And if they don't after the second, there's a very good chance they'll respond after the third. Now, keep your fingers crossed that that response is positive. Maybe it's negative. And if it's a no, then you're done. You don't contact that person anymore. But until they say no, there's still a potential client. Now, if you are trying to reach out somebody, like say you're going after a big company, a big organization, and you keep reaching out and you're not hearing back. You send the emails. You say that, I haven't heard back from you. I want to make sure you're getting my messages. And then you still don't hear back. There's nothing wrong with you going after somebody else within the company. Maybe you were going after the president and it's just beneath them. They're not replying to you. So go after somebody else. Go after the marketing manager. Go after the general manager. Go after whoever, somebody else in the company. Until you hear no, they are still a potential client. I know this isn't the best example, but think of a telemarketer. Whenever you pick up the phone and there's a telemarketer on there, they will keep trying to sell you whatever it is they're trying to sell until you say no, at which point they will stop, because that's the way they've been trained. As long as you don't say no, you're still a potential client to them. Even if you say, well, I'm not sure, or I don't really need that, to them, that is not a no. And they will keep trying. They'll try to find a way. Well, why don't you? And so forth. And until you actually say no, sometimes that no may just be hanging up the phone, but until you say no, they will be persistent and keep at it. Now, I know the whole telemarketer thing makes this whole topic sound a little slimy, but telemarketers are just one aspect of the whole salesperson game. So maybe that wasn't the best example, but I hope you got my point that as long as somebody that you're reaching out to doesn't say no, there's always the possibility that they may end up being a client in the future. And they may really appreciate the effort you put in following up after the initial contacts. So as you're trying to build your client list, make sure that all these emails, these drop-ins, these cold calls, make sure that you always follow up, because you can be the best designer in the world. But if you don't practice your sales skills, which includes this follow-up, then you're going to have a very hard time growing your design business. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. Now, I would love to know how often you follow up with potential clients and what your strategy is for doing so. Please let me know by leaving a comment for this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 107. Now, I'm a little bit short on time this week, so I'm going to keep this episode short like it is and skip the question. I do have a couple in the can, although I would love to get some more because I am running low. If you would like your question answered on a future episode of the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback, fill out the form, and I will try to answer it on a future episode. But for this week, I will be skipping the question, and since there was no new iTunes review to share, I'm just going to end the podcast here. So thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you brush up on your salesperson skills and remember the follow-up the next time you contact a potential client. And I wish you the best of luck with it and with your design business. Until next time, I am Mark Decote, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.